Welcome, everybody. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce you, Dr. MEHMET OZALP. Today, we are going to talk about the problem of evil from the perspective of Risale-i Nur. And please let me allow to introduce himself, Dr. OZALP, one of the most prominent community leaders in Australia. He is the director of Center for Islamic Studies and Civilisation at Charles Sturt University. He is also the founder and executive director of the ISRA Academy. Dr. OZALP is the editor-in-chief of the Australian Journal of Islamic Studies. Scholar, public intellectual, community leader for almost 3 decades. And he's the author of several publications, 47 publications, including four books. He's working now on his 5th book on the Muslim youth in the West. Today, ladies and gentlemen, he is going to talk about the problem of evil and suffering from the perspective of Risale-i Nur. And we are expecting a good number of questions through the chat box. And after his presentation, we will share and we will ask the questions you have sent through the chat box. Welcome, Dr. OZALP. How are you?
I'm well, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so this problem of evil, one of the greatest problems in the humanity. For a long time, it was discussed and written many books in various fields, especially in philosophy of religion. And you think that Risale-i Nur and Said Nursi has a distinct attitude and idea about the problem of evil. So would you illuminate us from this perspective?
That's right. Not a problem. Maybe I'll begin by saying that Said Nursi is one of the most prominent theologians in the 20th century. What makes him unique is that he tackled these big theological questions as a Muslim theologian, as a Muslim scholar, in a way that I would say no other major scholar who founded a movement have tackled. So his insights and his writings are very important for us. Of course, this topic was discussed in terms of nature of good and evil, free will, with many theologians before Said Nursi, but he gives us that a modern contemporary perspective as the argument against God has taken a big hold, and this problem of suffering become a major objection to the existence of God. So in that context, Said Nursi provides an answer. But I should say that he doesn't tackle the problem on its own. He always does it in association with something else, because it's not a major article of belief in Islam, or yes, it is in connection to qadar, وَبِالْقَدَرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ مِنَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى, as in the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that it's a belief in qadar, divine determining, and that good and evil are from God. It's entered into the Muslim creed, so that the problem of evil is an important one as a cardinal belief in Islam, so we need to address it. So I'll share my screen if you don't mind. And
please do.
Yes. Now there's a passage in Risale-i Nur from the book Lamalar, of flashes, the 13th flash. This particular section is based on this. My presentation will be based on that, because I feel like he tackles this problem in its greatest in this section. He also touches on in 26 words in the book's words in connection with qadar. I'll bring some of those summaries of 26 words into this presentation as well. So let's begin. So the passage 13 flesh begins with Said Nursi quoting these two verses from the Quran. Basically, they are. It's about وَقُلْ رَبِّ أَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ حَمَذَاتِ الشَّيَاطِينِ وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ رَبِّ أَن يَحْضَرُونَ, which means and say, my Lord, I seek refuge in you from the promptings and provocations of the Satans, and I seek refuge in you, my Lord, lest they be present with me. So, and he has actually 13 points in this whole passage. I'm not going to go through all of them, but he poses a number of questions in relation to this. But the main problem is, why do Muslims have to seek refuge in God from the evil of Satan? Now, if you think about the concept of Satan in Islam, it's a being, it's an unseen being who rebelled against God, disobeyed his command to prostrate before Adam, and then he fell from his high standing or spiritual rank and became an enemy to human beings. But that animosity reflects itself in the spiritual promptings or whisperings. There's no physical Satans or shaitan do not have a physical power over human beings. It's all psychological or tempting. But also we've got, Said Nursi says, you've got God on the side of the believers. You've got the Prophet Muhammad on the side of the believers. Why, it's almost like God is not obviously equal to Satan, but why is Satan appeared to be so powerful, and why do Muslims need to seek refuge in God from the evil of Satan's? So where does its power come from? So in that, he discovers a key aspect of nature of evil in connection with Satan. So that's why it's very important. The second problem is, obviously, Satan is an evil being, and he causes the fall and damnations of human beings. So the results are also evil. So that brings us the second problem in connection with these verses or creation of Satan. Like, why does evil exist in the first place? Why did God create Satan? Or in its broadest expression, if God is all powerful, all merciful, and all knowing, why doesn't God stop evil and suffering and create Satan? So this is the second biggest question in relation to suffering, good and evil. And Said Nursi addresses this as well. But one thing that I really like about the way he answers in the second problem, it's in connection with human beings, and I shall come to that. All right, so I'll begin by talking about human nature and nafs a little bit. This is not covered in 13th flesh, but something that I have learned from Risale Nur is that nothing that God creates is there in its for an evil purpose. It's always for a good reason. There's always and human nature is one of them. Like nafs is created for human beings, as the Quran says, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. It's also in the Quran that God has created nafs, human soul, not the spirit, but the intermediary soul that's between spirit and the body, as a perfect being, perfect thing. God has perfected it. So it's not there as a flawed entity in human nature, but then it's inspired good and evil. So if you just reflect on that a little bit before we get into the 13th flesh, what we see is that in the human nature, we have, the human body, we've got these hormones that are essential for survival, but they lead to desires, and these are like hunger, thirst, sexual desire, fight and flight response. We have to have these, and these are linked with the human nafs, and also intrinsically linked with body through the hormones. And you know, they're very powerful in all of us, and they generate the emotional responses. They generate desires particularly in the limbic system of the brain. Amygdala, for example, is very important for emotions. It's found through neuroscience, and you know, when the parts of the brain get damaged that are linked with amygdala and the frontal cortex, the individual loses the ability to have emotions and to make decisions. So what we call intuition comes through the merging of these desires with the mind. So they're very important. But the thing is, this is also similar to animals. Like animals also do have a limbic brain, and they have desires sometimes more powerful than us. The key thing with human being is that, this is the number 2, there are no limits set to these desires. That's a very important distinction between humans and animals. Animals have limits, but humans don't. And like for example, a lion may kill a zebra to survive and to eat, but he doesn't go and become a serial killer of the zebras just because he can kill zebras in the desert in Africa. But human beings can kill for its own sake, you know, without the need for survival. So that really shows. This goes with sexual also. For example, animals only mate in seasons, whereas generally most animals but humans can mate anytime, basically. So it is this aspect of human nature that gives human being the variable nature and the ahsan al-taqwim and asfal safilin, you know, between the highest of the high to the lowest of the low. It gives us a variable nature, which is very important later on for Sayyid Nursi in the way he explains theodicy. And there's a third point in this, which is that good and evil originates from desires having no limit. And so I think that it's intrinsically linked to human nature, our idea of good and evil. Yes, good and evil may exist by command of Allah or by revelation of God, in a similar way that, let's say, the governments in our societies, you know, make up laws. Let's say speeding law. You may not, in Australia, you cannot go beyond 110 kilometers per hour in highways. But if the government changes that to 100 kilometers an hour, all of a sudden it was okay to travel at 105, but now you can't by law. So there's it's not in the nature of speeding or that speed, that it's in the lawgiver setting those laws makes something good, wrong, or right. But there's also a very intrinsic aspect of good and evil in its nature because of human beings. So basically, good originates when we do things that are selfless. And being selfless is going beyond the desires as well, because you don't have to. You don't have to help another person. You don't have to give charity. You don't have to sometimes achieve justice. But when we do, it's seen as good, these things, because we go beyond the interest of the self. And evil originates from transgressing the rights of others or set limits. and when you harm others or and certain wrong acts are done, that we call it evil. So these are some really three important points in relation to human nature that is tied to good and evil. So good and evil emerges from human beings having desires and having no limits on those desires, but then that's also for a purpose, for a very important purpose, which we shall come to. Okay, so let's now try to answer this question. Why does Satan appear to be so powerful, and humans have to seek refuge in Satan? So in discussing that, Said Nursi gives us what he believes is the nature of evil, good and evil, a bit more closely. And he says that evil is these four things, anything that's negative, destructive, non-existent, and harmful or causing harm. When we say negative, he calls it menfi. Like menfi, let's say we want to do something good. We want to establish a charity organization which is going to feed, people, hungry people. But somebody in that group becomes negative, so brings reasons why we shouldn't be entering into this good organization, and becomes a barrier to the establishment of this organization. So at that point, being negative has just caused an evil outcome. So for Said Nursi, that is evil. And obviously, when we say evil, evil has degrees. Not be preventing something may not be as bad as destroying something that already exists. And that's the second one, destruction. And so if something good exists, that's destroyed, that is also evil for Said Nursi. And destruction is very easy. And that's a key aspect of Satan choosing this path. And the third one is non-existent. And this is when a key ingredient of for something good to exist is not there, or prevented from coming into existence, then that good result does not come into existence, and therefore evil is caused. He calls it adami. So evil is adami, meaning it's tied with non-existence of things. And we could sometimes, others define as evil as non-existence of good, something like that. So to make this point, the fourth one is being harmful or causing harm. He calls it bozmak, spoil something or harming something that already exists. Something may be intact, but you cause harm in that, so it doesn't deliver its full goodness, let's say, and that's also evil in the sight of Said Nursi. So by opposite, the good is the opposite of all these three. So it's good is positive, it's constructive, it's existent. That is, in good, always something comes into existence. Elsewhere in Risale, Said Nursi says that this is why goodness has to be attributed to God, because the human will or human action in itself is not enough to bring things into existence. So we always there's that causal gap for God to come into the equation and create that that thing into existence. And the fourth thing is mending. That is, if there's some fault in something, fixing that, repairing that, then brings a full function, and that's good. So having said this, established this, he says, makes, I think, very important conclusions based on this. Two conclusions. The first one is that he says the way of Satan and evil, and Satan is in particular here, and the way of evil is in general, it follows these four ways: is negative, destructive, non-existent, and causes harm. And because this is easy, they appear to be powerful. And you know, a big, massive, let's say, building, it would take many years to build, millions of dollars, maybe, you know, hundreds or thousands of people who are skilled, you know, engineers and architects and other workers, craftsmen. They work on these things to build a building, and it takes a long time. Whereas to destroy that, you can just place a bomb, and then the whole building comes down in seconds. We must have all seen, you know, those destroying buildings with explosives. In seconds it comes down. So destruction, or the way of evil, way of Satan, is very easy, whereas the path of goodness, and it calls us the prophetic way, and the way of the goodness is difficult. You know, it requires time, resources, and many supporters. You have to always bring something into existence. You have to build something. And he gives the example of the prophet, peace be upon him, that he said he spent 23 years, had to convince all of the people in Mecca, majority of the Arabia had to believe. But in his struggle, he tried always to follow the good path, and therefore it was not easy. He had to suffer himself. The cost of all of this had to come from the Sahaba and the companions. So he couldn't go to the satanic or the evil path, which is sometimes tempting because it's easy, because it's quick, but prophetic way, the Islamic way, let's say the Quranic way, would always promote us to follow the path of goodness. And this is why he says believers must seek refuge in God, to remind them that they have to follow the path of goodness, not the path of Satan, and that we need God's help to balance out the disproportionate, you know, aspect of good and evil in that sense. So I think this is very important for Muslims, especially Muslim activists around the world, that the path always have to be positive, constructive, have to bring some things into existence and fix things. And this is the prophetic Quranic way. Okay, so this addresses the first problem, you know, explains why Satan appears to be powerful, but he's really not. He's not really powerful. It's just the nature of evil is easy. And that's a key distinction he makes. So before we go into how Sayyid Nursi addresses the second problem of theodicy, I just want to remind 4 principles from 26th word in relation to good and evil. And these are, the first one he says is that natural evil is a necessary result of keeping earth hospitable to life. That is, you know, when an earthquake happens, obviously, you know, it causes harm, buildings are destroyed, you know, people die. But the earthquake is not there to cause harm to living beings or to humans. Earthquake is there to make sure the tectonic plates are working well, so that the crust of the earth remains hospitable to human life, or life in general, and also human life. Also, as we know, the tectonic plate movements are necessary for the creation of mountains, valleys, and without those, human beings could not live on the planet, and the life could not be supported. But then if we happen to be in the way of these earthquakes, and then the harm is generated as a secondary result. But the primary purpose of these things that appear to be disasters are really to keep the life on Earth, the Earth systems operating and hospitable for life. So this is really important. You know, earthquakes used to happen when there was no human beings on Earth. and it was always there. So it was always there for this reason. Second point he makes is that everything is good in itself or by the results that they produced. So in the natural world, everything contributes to life in one way or the other. You know, let's say we give the bee example. Bees pollinate the plants, produce honey. So everything that they do is really good. But sometimes we see these trees. The trees, what are they here for? Their purpose is not very obvious to the naked eye, especially in the old times. But now we know that trees are absolutely essential for habitats, you know, biodiversity of life, you know, the rainforest and the cleaning of the earth, the atmosphere. They're essential for life on Earth. So sometimes things don't look, we don't know why they exist, or they don't appear to be good outright, but he says that the results that they produce is good. Like he gives examples of rain and fire to illustrate this point. So maybe the first two is about addresses natural evil, the evil that we see in the natural world, not necessarily human beings. But then he moves on to human beings, and he makes this very famous point. He says, creation of evil is not evil, but choosing of evil is evil. And this is in relation to human beings. Like, why would, because in Islamic theology, the human beings choose their actions and God creates those actions. So why would God create these actions and creation and then cause evil? So we think that God is the cause of evil. What Said Nursi is saying is that, no, it's not God causing evil, because without human beings in the natural world, in Said Nursi's view, there is no evil. Everything is good in itself or by the results that they produce. But when we come to human beings, there is evil, but these evil are a result of human choice. Basically, human freedom of choice comes into place, and God, respecting human freedom of choice, creates the evil that we want to do, basically. And we'll come to the reason why also a little bit later. And the fourth and final point he wants to make, makes is that he says, Qadar-i ilahi always achieves justice in this world or in the next. With Qadar-i ilahi, what he means is that, yes, humans do all these things, we make decisions, we do good, and we want to do good things or bad things. But behind all of that, the qadar of Allah, the divine determination of Allah is also operating, is also making His will. His will is kul al-irada, or His universal will. It's operating behind our actions as well. And in that, qadar ilahi always achieves justice. And he gives the example of, he says, a man may be trialed for theft unjustly. The judge sentences this person for theft when he hasn't stole anything. So he's innocent in terms of being a thief, but he may have committed another crime that nobody knows about. And in that sense, Qadar-i ilahi achieves justice. By the injustice of the human judge, Qadar-i ilahi, the judge, the Allah, the creator, achieves justice. Obviously, this may not always be the case, and innocent people get punished for none of the. But he just, I think the example just illustrates that we don't know always how justice is achieved. Like certain things that may appear to be unjust to us, but when you look at the behind the scenes, when you consider everything, if all knowledge, all information was available to us, then we would know that that's not evil or that's not wrong. But because we don't know everything, and our experience of events are sporadic and random, we think injustice is being done. And this is best illustrated in the Quran with the story of Moses and Khidr. You know, there's that famous 3 incidents that Musa thinks it's evil, but really it was justice that was being achieved, and good results were being achieved as a result of what appeared to be evil. So let's put aside these 4 points on the side so that we keep remember these, and we'll go to 13th flash. So basically, the problem of evil and suffering can only be allowed by a all-merciful God, all-powerful, all-knowing God, if there is a very important reason. So if we can give this reason, then we achieve theodicy. Basically, we solve the problem of evil in the world. So Said Nursi does this in a number of steps. The first thing that he says is that there are numerous levels in human nature from seed to fully realized human perfection, like insan al-kamil. So between a baby born into this world and insan al-kamil, what a human being could be, there are numerous levels and layers of development from seed to a fully grown fruit-bearing tree. He gives that example, analogy of a seed, which is just very small, and when you plant that, over time, it becomes a tree, then gives many fruits. So human being is like that. And he says there's even more layers of perfection and development. He says kamalat, uses the word kamalat there, or virtuous development in human beings. So there is that potential in human beings. Maybe what we can say is that we can say that now because we know human beings who exist. But imagine that human beings didn't exist at some point, that Allah or God can create a being like human being who can have this potential to grow in a way that Satan or the jinn or angels cannot. Not creating this being would actually be evil in the sight of Said Nursi, or greater evil, we should say. So basically, for Said Nursi, human being, just the possibility of human being, or the fact that we exist in this way, is a good thing, and that potential, human potential, is something that needs to be unleashed. And the key to unleashing is mujahada. Mujahada is a jihad, basically, or struggle, spiritual struggle. He says that mujahada is the main process and the stimulus in surfacing these potentials in human beings. Because every potential needs a process and a trigger to bring it into to surface that potential. So for human beings, we have to have this world, the arena of this world. Sometimes Muslims, we call this testing ground. It's really a ground of mujahada to trigger the potential, to release potential of human beings. And but that process or a struggle is only possible by the choice of good and evil and the existence of nafs and satans. So without, if we weren't given, if humans weren't given the freedom of choice or this free will, then you can't have mujahada because there's nothing to struggle against. So by evil or possibility of doing evil existing, being there in front of human beings to choose, then the mujahada, the testing, is real. If it's not real, if it's just a game or a simple choice, or maybe a choice is not the right word, just a simple game that you may enter or not enter, or it's optional, let's say, then it wouldn't be real. Nobody would probably go down that path. So basically, our mujahada are being tested on this earth, or we're born in this earth. The struggle is real. The good and evil has to exist, and the nafs, we're given this nafs, as I explained earlier, which has desires and no limits. They really trigger certain impulses of doing bad things and also sometimes doing good things also. And then Satan's there to tempting human beings. It's really, the conditions are made or prepared in its maximum way to trigger this potential in human beings to come out. If it wasn't like this, Said Nursi says that human beings would be like angels, good but limited, and all that potential would remain dormant, and we would all be equal in terms of our spiritual rank. So there would not be any differentiation between, sometimes he calls it, Abu Jahl, who's got a soul which is like coal, and you've got Abu Bakr, who's got a soul like a diamond. So that testing, that mujahada, releases those potentials. Sometimes people have, they could choose evil, and we all have the potential for being the worst evil person in the world, but we also have the potential to be the best person in the world. What we choose is as a response to the conditions of life, and that's what makes human beings valuable. Or when we do good, our good becomes rewardable, valuable, because we've got that possibility of doing immense evil as well. Like when you go to hospital, we have a MRI machine. We never say that MRI machine is a compassionate machine, because it helps diagnose diseases and helps human beings. It's a machine. It's supposed to do that. If it doesn't, we throw it out or fix it. But when a human being does something really good to another human being, we say, wow, what such a compassionate person. Because we have that, we don't have to, and we've chosen to be that way, in spite of going against ourselves and all these temptations. So this struggle is very important to unleash human potential. There is and if it was the other way around, he says, if God was to prevent this realization of this greater good, to avoid the lesser evil, because some people are going to do the wrong things, this would run counter to mercy, wisdom, and justice. He says, because there is a greater good to be achieved. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to stop this lesser evil, the greater good would be prevented. Like he gives the example of rain. Just because rain makes you wet, and sometimes there's floods, maybe floods your house. I mean, just to stop that, if it didn't rain, and then the greater good of rain becoming essential for fresh water and growing crops, that would be a greater evil in the sight of justice, wisdom, and mercy. So basically, Said Nursi turns this around and says that it is precisely the mercy of God that allows existence of lesser evil, because it would be a cruelty if people's potentials would remain dormant, and that a lot of the good that comes out of humans having free will would not be realized, and that would be it would run against mercy, and it would run against wisdom of God, which is that higher purposes are achieved through certain actions that seem not appropriate. And justice, justice is that, if on one hand you're going to create human beings with this immense potential, and on the other hand, you're going to stop that potential to come into realization. That would be unfair, unjust. There's one question emerges from this, and Said Nursi poses this himself, which is, yeah, but it appears that a lot of people are choosing the evil path. You know, the majority of people seem to never realize this perfect human being or this amazing goodness, amazing potential that human beings can in potentiality, but in reality, you know, you have billions of people, millions, just never realize that potential. So, in fact, that this argument of greater good and lesser, you know, evil, does that work in this practical reality? And Said Nursi says, yes, it does still work, because he says, importance and value, like significance and value, look at quality, not quantity. So, so in his view, a small group attaining perfection is sufficient to meet the purpose. And he gives the example of, he says, imagine a farmer has 1,010 seeds. So, and he's planting all these 1,010 seeds into the soil. So basically, then they're all subjected to the processes in the soil that would potentially bring out the potential in the seed. By the act of planting in the ground facilitates the seeds growing. But it says, imagine 1,000 of these seeds never come out, never realize their full potential as a fruit-bearing tree, but 10 come out. He says that it would still be worth it. It will still be worth it, because that 10 that become tree, they would produce millions of other seeds and millions of fruits in their lifetime. So although in terms of, in a quantitative way, you seem like you're losing, but in quality, you're winning. The farmer always wins. You know, if he cultivates and if there's water and so on, farming always produces surplus and a yield and a harvest. So in a way, he's saying, he's drawing an analogy that we're all, as human beings, put into this world or in this ground or this fertile ground to be tested, the arena of mujahada, so that we bring out this fantastic potential that's in us. But if, you know, a small percentage of people achieve that, the fruits that they produce are far more outweigh maybe the loss in the not achieving those the outcomes in majority of human beings. So this is the way Said Nursi justifies existence of evil in the world. Basically, for him, it creates a process and a stimulus for human beings to realize their potential. And if God was to stop this, then these potentials would never be realized. So we would never see what greatness human beings can achieve. And for that, it's worth it. So we'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. OZALP. It was a good, very illuminating presentation. So let me ask a question, and later I will go to the chat box and read some of the questions. So why there is evil and suffering in the world? Is it possible to justify? Is it possible to justify every kind of evil, considering these points? For instance, suffering of the children. What is the greater good for the suffering of the children?
Yeah, I guess what we explain is general, and then usually people give counter examples, and you know, the suffering of children are the biggest one. Now, obviously, nobody would I even think also suffering of children and animals. Animals sometimes is also a great thing. Now, let's take suffering of children, and that could be at the hands of human beings. So personal evil is involved, or it could be through disease like cancer and other forms of disease, and that would be natural evil. So the first one, the personal evil, is clearly, it's a choice that some human beings are making to inflict suffering on children or other human beings, and that's up to us. And if God was to stop that, it would mean that he would violate the freedom of choice of that particular human being. So, and where do we stop? Like, firstly, we don't know how much of these personal and natural evil God is stopping. Like, we could all human beings could be born with cancer. We could all die of cancer at the age of 5, but we're not, So these are extremely rare situations. And so Said Nursi, he says it in somewhere else in relation to these earthquakes. So he says that like the earth is a place where these opposites merge. Like there's this universal laws in the universe, and the earth is this tiny place where all these laws are manifesting and merging. So these are creating forces that has to be balanced out. And sometimes the earthquake is a product of you trying to balance out these forces. And then, I mean, how often an earthquake happens? It's very rare, but when it does, it's very destructive. So he says, God has to allow these for the greater purpose of, as I explained, the hospitability of life on earth. But he says sometimes to show his ahadiyya, to show his specific mercy, he saves people in a miraculous ways, to illustrate, to show to human beings that he's still there and he's still merciful in spite of these universal laws being there. So if we just say, for example, if God, like everybody becomes sick except children, only adults become sick, so children never become sick. Like, is that feasible? That's not feasible. Like sickness will come to everybody. And if God was to stop somebody maybe torturing and killing a child, which is terrible, and it just illustrates how evil human beings can be. But where do we stop? So it's a bit like every time we want to do something bad, we want God to stop us. And every time we want to do something good, God should allow us. It really comes down to that. If God was to, but that would be removing human free will. That's no different to angels. So angels are beings who have no capacity to do evil. They can only do good things. That's why Said Nursi they say that angels have partial will. That their will is not, they have a will, but it's not complete like human beings. So unfortunately, like if you say, for example, sometimes we try to defend, suffering and good and evil in this way, but sometimes, like we don't need to always bring a justification, although Said Nursi does. But what we can sometimes do is that, like existence of these things does not run counter to existence of God, a merciful God. So that's another way of approaching this.
Yes, but
so if you were, let's say, for example, yeah, let me finish by saying that if there was a universe, if there was another universe where a being was created and that being was given a choice, like freedom of choice, they would at least do one thing wrong. Like, it's not possible to create a being with free will and that nothing wrong happens. And we know this through the Adam and Eve story. Like, they were created and they were given freedom of choice immediately. Like, eat everything but except this tree. And then eventually they did, you know. So I think this is the condition that we find ourselves in. And the key thing that we need to look at is that, does compassion of God still at play? Can we show compassion to still? Yes, we can. And then there's a good reason for this as well.
Okay, it is a very much from the perspective of a let me say a person who is having a good time and doesn't really face a great suffering, and those people who are facing great sufferings and the evils, and especially in the modern time. So this is one of the most important arguments for against the existence of God. Why do you think it is strong, or why the people taking this argument very strong for the against the existence of God?
Well, it is a strong argument. It is because if God is, if there is a God, and that God is, we say God is all merciful, and He's all knowing, in that He would know suffering of everybody, and He's all powerful. He has the power to stop it, but why doesn't He? You know, so it's a powerful argument. But that's why we're saying, if there is a greater reason, a greater good, then He wouldn't stop this. So there is a greater good. That's what we try to illustrate. So there is basically the way this universe is created, the way human being is created, and the purposes that God wants to get out of this creation require the existence of these things. So that's the way it is created. So I don't, the perfect world, like a perfect world, perfect goodness existed before this universe in the form of angelic life, you know, angelic consciousness or existence. It was there. But just compare yourself to angels. Like, would you like to be an angel, or would you like to be a human being? Like, I don't know, some people will choose being an angel, but I'd rather be a human being. One thing that
why do you think so? I mean,
because okay, let me say to you, let's say you're given the life, you want to live in Dubai, you're going to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You don't have to work, and you're not going to feel any pain in the world. You're not going to feel any painful emotions for the rest of your life. Would you rather that, or would you rather that you have some sort of a struggle, excitement in your life, some adventure, that you have that freedom to try out what's possible for you? And so, I mean, we see this always in the Hollywood movies. All Hollywood movies, the great stories in these movies are always start with an average person. They're going on about lives. They're just here. And then they are confronted with some incident, something happens. They have to make choices. They have to protect their loved ones. And they have to struggle against an evil force. And that brings out the best in them. By the end of the movie, that character grows and they become better person. So that's, we find these stories really inspirational because we are human. Basically, we are playing out story of our lives in a real sense, you know. So we could, but I just want to say that it's not always like, the choice is not always the best, most comfortable, and then the worst. there's a normal distribution. And Imam Ghazali points this out. He says, he provides this argument for like in afterlife, will majority of people gonna go to hell, or will majority of people gonna go to paradise? He actually says majority of the people will go to paradise. He says the reason is that the compassion of God on this earth in its normal distribution, I'm not talking about in normal distribution, there's always extremes on either end. But he says, majority of our lives, we are healthy. Yes, we become sick. Sometimes you can die of cancer or disease, but majority of your life you live as a healthy person. Sometimes we get sad, sometimes life is painful, but majority of the time it's good. And he says, majority of people that you interact with are good people. Sometimes you could have a bad luck, or you may happen to live under a oppressive ruler, or sometimes this army comes and destroys everything on their way, and you happen to be on their way. Like, these are just qadar, or bad luck, But it says when you consider everything, it's really majority is good, majority is compassionate, comfortable, not painful, because this is the sunnatullah, and in the afterlife it will be the same. He says, far less people will end up in hell than in paradise, and inshallah it becomes that way.
Inshallah.
So I guess my point is that my point is that, like, we can show these on that normal curve, this very extremes, and but that doesn't change the fact that the majority, far greater of people, are comfortable. Like, we've got almost 8 billion people on this planet. Yes, some are going to bed hungry, but majority are in a very good situation, and that we are capable of helping those the people that are hungry, and we don't.
All right, thank you very much. Osman Öztoprak making an interesting point. You may have some comment on it. He says, I found linking physical attributes with the spiritual aspect through hormones is a very important, is a really touched topic as well. Do you think so? Do you have any comment on that? You relate with the physical
yes,
hormones and the, yeah.
Yes, I do. I do believe that, obviously, I do accept the Islamic concept of, the human being have a trion. That is, in Islam, it's not dualistic, it's trion. That is, there's a spirit, ruh, there's a body, physical body,
yes.
Jism or wujud, and then there's the nafs, that's something in between. And also, if we go with the Quranic notion that لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ,
Yes.
like the word ahsan al-taqwim is I translate it as best integrated form. That is, the word taqwim, qawama, when you mix all the parts in the right way, just right way, that you reach that state, qawama. So with human beings, all these elements, the three main parts, and then each part have components, they're all put together in a perfect way, in the best possible way. Then the as-salah comes later. The corruption comes later. This is a very important Quranic point. Human being is designed to be good, designed to be perfect. But then with the free will, and that free will and us doing wrong things corrupts it. Now, the thing with the hormones is that hormones are, or the spiritual elements of the human being manifest themselves on the body. And the body sends information to the spiritual elements. And these are the sensory organ, the five senses take information from the earth, send it to the brain processes, and perception happens at the spiritual level, I believe. In a similar way, the nafs, the thing that we call nafs, which is the part that is tempted, that have desires, but also the part that is most prone to development. You can't develop the spirit in Islam. Like in the Islamic conceptualization, spirit is constant. It doesn't change. But the spirit can. And the hormones play a key role.
You said physical body cannot really develop in a further, but the spiritual would. Are you saying that?
No, the physical body develops as well. Like we know this with Olympic Games at the moment. Like you can train and really improve your body. Yeah, and the spirit is a different thing. It's like your software in your body. That software, the commands don't change. But what changes is the interface between the body and the spirit, which is the nafs. That's why we have this 7 levels of, nafs, nafsul ammara, nafsul lawama, that our scholars and spiritual masters understood this really well. So it's really nafs development we should be looking at, not spiritual development. But I know that concept of nafs doesn't exist in the Western world, so we end up using spiritual development. But I just wanted to point that out, and that I feel that the nafs is linked or mapped to the body, or it shows its effect through hormones, and the hormones also affect nafs. And we know, like without hormones, you wouldn't have the desires. Like the hunger is linked to the hormone called ghrelin, and if the ghrelin is released, you feel hungry. If it doesn't get released, you don't feel hungry. So, I mean, that's a fact, So there is. If your body doesn't produce testosterone, or you're not gonna have the sexual desire, and so these desires that we attribute to nafs are linked with hormones very directly.
Okay, thank you very much. There is also interesting question from Isha Aron. And saying that in some cases, those people who are going to be should be the exemplar, good character, the leader or whatever. In a sense, he's saying that, they are actually misusing their position, personal encounter with the evil, sexual abuse by the trusted religious leaders. So that is how can you justify that?
Well, I don't justify it. If they do something wrong,
yeah, of course,
it's wrong.
Justify,
it's
but
really
the existence. Is it something rational to say that, that is okay, that will exist?
No, maybe let me have, I don't fully, I guess, maybe what I don't know the intent of the question, but let me say this. Just like there are degrees to goodness and there are degrees to evil as well. So I measure the degrees of goodness in human action to selflessness, the degree of selflessness.
Okay.
Now, the more selfless you are, the more value there is in that good deed. And but I don't think that pure selflessness is not possible. Like for example, let's say you work in a company, and the company is paying you, so there's self-interest. But you have to produce more value for that company in order to justify your salary. So you're actually contributing more value than what you're paid. So in a way, even in that situation, you're a little bit selfless. You're giving your time, your skills to a company. But that would probably be the least. But then you have a situation where, like that woman, the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave the example of that woman who a prostitute that fed water to a dog when she didn't have to. It was just so selfless that God put her into paradise just for that. But even in these actions of pure selflessness, our brain is releasing dopamine. It's making us happy. So we still get a little bit of payment, a little bit of pleasure from that. So that's why I say it's not possible to be, 100% purely selfless. So in a similar way, if we define evil as transgressing rights of others, causing harm, causing destruction, the things that I have explained in my talk, that has degrees as well. So there's a little bit of evil, a little bit of harm. Like, let's say you shout to your kid, 2-year-old kid, unnecessarily. That's evil. That's wrong. You have that power over that child, and you're abusing that power a little bit, but obviously it's not the same as abusing that child in a sexual way or a violent way. And that would be probably one of the worst things you can do, So there are degrees to evil. So the example that was given, that people that have been trusted, other human beings, or especially masses, have trust in these human beings, whether they elect politicians to power or they respect, religious leaders, they give them respect and the reverence, thinking that they're good, they have the knowledge that they're there to help, but then they do the opposite.
Yeah.
So the elected leader becomes an oppressor, and the religious leader starts abusing his followers. And so this is what we call zulm. So zulm is the worst form of evil, according to the Quran. And it comes from the word darkness, the zulumat. And so I think these are some of the, whenever a person has power over other people and that human being chooses to inflict harm to others, the degree of evil, exponentially increases, and they become pharaoh-like people, I guess. But there is also immense possibility of goodness, like a good, just leader can really bring happiness to millions of people by having the right policies, being democratic, being listening, using the money that the government collects through taxes, spending on people, or a religious leader who guides people, to happiness in this world and happiness in the next, does immense good. Actually, Said Nursi, when he's giving the examples he says the Salihin, and he gives 3 examples, like prophets, the saints, the awliya, and the Salihin, or men and women who are righteous, the saintly people, the prophets. So for him, these are the exemplary people who are good and do immense good for other human beings, and they show the full fruits of what it means to be human. And obviously, if somebody in that position abuses that, they're no longer in that category. Like they have the garb, the persona, but they're not really fall into that category in a genuine way.
Okay, thank you very much. Osman Öztoprak has another question. And he is saying that absence of this approach leads absence between hormones and the desires and the causing the evil, which you presented. Absence of this approach leads people to believe all psychological problems are making of Satan, not the imbalance of the hormones. What do you think?
Oh, okay. Is it because of the look, let me say this, and this is what Said Nursi is particularly, he emphasizes in many places that human being has these, he calls it jihazat, the machinery in our nature. So we are a very complex being, and then we are placed in this, human being nature, and then we're supposed to learn how to run this being, how to use this machinery. It's a bit like let's imagine you put in the cockpit of a airliner and you say, go fly this plane. You wouldn't be able to, you'd crash it. So we need training. You would need training. So that's why human beings, we get educated. Like when we were born, we're learning constantly. We're going to schools for many years. We're using the collective experience of human beings over the centuries or thousands of years. So we learn. So this is why learning becomes key to human existence and purpose. In 23rd word, so Nursi emphasizes this a lot. As a key distinguishing part of human nature is also that we have that capacity to learn. So basically, but it can also go terribly wrong. Like it could be. I don't think we can just blame it on Satan. Like Satan's going to try. He's going to tempt us, especially play with our psychology, not with our hormones. I don't think Satan has power over human hormones, but because the society may be dysfunctional, we could be in a dysfunctional family. We could bring through genetically. We could be prone to certain things. If you put the seed in the wrong soil, it's not going to grow really well, will it? So there's so many factors involved that can cause human beings to dysfunction. And I don't think Satan is the only one. And we have the power to really change anything. I know that there is medication is involved in extreme cases of mental illness, and they have their own place. The human beings have found cures to some of these things. They should be used, if there's extreme cases. But in most cases, proper relationships, good education and self-control is key to. Like, let's say. Now, there are days I wake up in the morning, I feel lazy, I don't want to do anything. And if I just follow with that feeling, I have a terrible day. But if I just snap out of it and say, okay, just get out, do some bike riding. I do bike riding. So I do 10 kilometers and I feel really good. And I have a fantastic day. So it's really up to me as well, to some extent. But also it's up to the people around me. Like, we're living in a society, we're not living on top of the mountain. Living in society brings a lot of benefits. Life becomes actually survivable, possible in human groupings. But also that has a downside, because you have a will, I have a will, you exercise, you have freedom, I have freedom. Sometimes they clash. You want to do something, I want to do something else, and so there's that aspect of free will that there is that produces a collective societal will. In effect, like people's wills superimpose, or they move in certain direction, or they superimpose and they cancel out, or they move in other directions. So that's also a very mysterious aspect of human free will, and also qadar in general, because we live in societies.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, so I'm looking at, I think these are the questions. So Dr. Ozalp, it was a very good presentation, and you explained most of the very difficult issue depending upon the side Nursi's work, Risale Nur. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to
Have a
other
nice
occasions.
Yes,
You too. Bye-bye.
yes, inshallah. We are looking forward to having you in another occasion.